3, 2. You don't say 1. Good. Okay, great. So welcome to Between the Gigs. I'm Marty Isenberg. Today, my co-host is Diana Gaeta.
Hey.
Hey, Diana.
Hi.
How's it going?
Pretty good so far.
That's cool. You have a bit of a cold.
I do.
Like.
I'm hoping that it gives me a good, attractive podcast voice.
It does.
Oh, thanks.
Get really close to the mic.
I'm so close to the mic.
Closer. So Diana is the host of a podcast called Femsplained. Diana, what is Femsplained again?
Femsplained, as we repeat ad nauseum, is a girls-only clubhouse podcast. It is two queer femme human beings sharing their nerdy experiences as queer women in nerd culture.
Cool. Oh, I forgot to ask you in pre-production if there was anything that you wanted to promote.
That would be the podcast, Femsplained podcast. So you did it.
Okay, great. So before we get started, I have some things to talk about. You can catch the Like Minds Trio every Monday at Lifetime Athletic at Sky, 7 to 10. Diana, you've been there a couple times. What do you think about there?
It's so lovely. It's like living in what I fantasized was a rich person's life when I was a child.
Yeah, it is kind of like that.
Yeah, it's very bougie and very nice.
It's like where The Good Place, the show The Good Place, would be set if it were in New York City.
Yeah.
In heaven.
It's just like a fancy pool, and there's jazz being played for you, and friendly young fellows bring you alcoholic beverages. It's beautiful.
And you can follow us at Like Minds Trio on Instagram. Every Wednesday, I'm playing at the Tack Room in 20 Hudson Yards with Bond Musique. This is the new home of Chef Thomas Keller. It's also super fancy, but they've got a really great setup for bands there. You know, a nice piano, and every Wednesday we invite different jazz musicians on the scene to join us. Last week we had Stan Killian, Perry Smith, my collaborator Rafael Rosa on guitar almost every week, and it's super fun. And if you have some notes for us here at Between the Gigs, you can email me at info@betweenthegigs.com. Tell me who you would like us to interview next, or if you think that we suck, go ahead and let us know.
Keep that to yourself.
No. Let's not censor them, Diana. They can say what they feel. But don't bother visiting betweenthegigs.com because you will not find anything. But perhaps by the time you are listening to this episode in the future, there will be a website. So I don't know, maybe visit it, see if it's there. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I know that when I listen to this, I'm going to check even if I know it's not there.
This is the first time I've ever talked to your radio personality.
Yeah, she's a little bit weird.
Oh, did I mention that Diana's my girlfriend?
Oh, you haven't told me that.
Oh, maybe we should have this conversation off air.
I'll pass you a note.
Okay. So today we are going to have a little conversation about the state of popular music. And I've been a little on the fence about doing this, and I'll tell you why. I'm trying to create a space for my music, obviously, and the music that I care about. And I don't want to offend anybody by telling them that their music sucks. And that's not exactly what I'm saying, but I don't want that perception. I don't think that you win over people by... I think you win over people by being passionate about your own thing rather than, saying things about things that people like, saying, seeming dismissive of someone else's passions. But at the same time, I do want to be honest about how I feel, and I think this could be a productive conversation. And I've been so busy getting the Clinton Hill Music School up and running for our fall semester that I haven't had any time to book a new guest. And Diana came up with this idea because I've been venting to her a lot lately about things.
Yeah, this is the first time we're having this conversation recorded. But we've had this conversation maybe 4 or 5 times.
We've test driven it a few times.
Yeah.
So we both have prepared opening remarks.
Yes.
I haven't heard Diana's yet. This is a bit of a rant. You can find it on Medium. I believe I titled the article, "Pop Music, Is It Cool? Let's Find Out." And I'm going to read it for you now. Okay, here we go. I often talk to Diana about how I think pop music is dumb and how I worry about the shrinking audiences for music that I feel has more intrinsic value. But I'm also aware there are a lot of pitfalls in my argument. To think any one piece of art is better than another one is ultimately subjective, and that feeling of superiority can come from a million selfish factors such as personal biases, insecurities, and unfamiliarity. That being said, it is my job, nay, my calling, to make the case for the music that I feel is extraordinarily important to this world. Music that has been paid less and less attention to by consumers over the course of my life. In vague terms, I am talking about instrumental music. Now let me start my opening remarks by talking about pop music. I don't really think that it is dumb. In fact, there's a lot of music I really like, and I have an enormous amount of respect for pop musicians that dedicate themselves fully to their craft. Tomorrow evening, I'm going to be playing a concert at the Triad. That's tonight. Tonight, I'm going to be playing a concert at the Triad that is basically all 80s pop music, and I'm playing with some heavy musicians. Justin Rothberg, Adam Wolf, and Greg Kenna, and it is fucking fun. I've devoted a large amount of my practicing to jazz and orchestral playing. I'm a pretty good pop player, but I acknowledge that Justin and Adam are a little bit better at it than I am, and I'm inspired by their depth of know-how. There's a level of nuance that great pop players have that I find truly amazing. So the first pitfall I'd like to avoid is I don't believe that jazz musicians are better musicians than pop musicians. And I think over the course of history of American popular music, it has served some important functions for society. It is the collective id of our society, the primitive and instinctive components of our personality. Pop music has helped millions of people escape from their anxieties, provided solace from their emotional hardships, created communities of fandoms, helped shape identities, helped shape the conversation about race, equality, and perhaps more than anything else, has created sexual awakenings and freedom from society-imposed repression. Even in the current pop environment, artists continue to break down social boundaries and be a voice for the voiceless. When you look at the totality of these accomplishments, you have to say to yourself, damn, I mean, that's pretty good, right? And yes, it is. But like any shift in society, there is a negative side as well. In our society, success is measured by how much money something can make. Pop music seeks to write hits. There's varying levels to what that means for individuals. And when I say pop music, I'm being incredibly broad, which maybe isn't helpful to my argument. Kurt Cobain is an example of someone who people just really related to despite his complete lack of care for success. Artists do break through and create hits because art really does matter to people. But when you look at our current Billboard pop music environment, the music just feels really stale to me. It feels to me as though everything has been run through a filter to make it as profitable and disposable for mass consumption as possible. Harmonies are simple, instruments have been mostly replaced with synthesizers, and so many songs have the same build-up and structure. Here's where my argument runs into a wall, though. I am an extremely overeducated music nerd. The arguments I'm making could have been made about the origins of hip-hop, which I do think was a revolution, or the blues, or even jazz at one point. Historically, when Europeans first heard African music, they thought it was inferior based on the fact that the African culture didn't write their music down, and their instruments were made of simpler things like gourds and stuff. Not the finely crafted European stringed instruments and woodwinds. But now we understand the power of music that comes from an oral tradition. An oral tradition can be more rhythmically complex, like that of India and Africa, because it is easier to learn a complicated rhythm from someone showing it to you than it is to see it written down. So while European music was more advanced harmonically, African music was more advanced rhythmically. So when one examines art, you should look for the things that make it great, and not the elements it does not possess. But what can I say? I have anxieties about the state of music. To cite some statistics, only 11% of people today can read music. Pop songs for the majority of the most famous artists are composed factory style by a bunch of Swedish producers and Dr. Luke. Jazz is the most unpopular style of music by record sales, and orchestras all across the country struggle to stay alive. Did I also mention it's increasingly impossible for smaller tier artists to earn a modest income because streaming services pay microcents for the fruits of their labor? What's to blame for this decline of musical awareness and proficiency? I'd like to make the case that over the slow march of time, the rise of technology and consumerism, and also the lack of music education in school, we've lost sight of the power of music. Music is an ancient magic. It's developed over thousands of years of human history. We have traditions of music all over the world that each generation would build upon. Each of these cultures address telling the story of their society through different ways, different instruments, different tuning systems, different scales and concepts. At one point in Western cultures, composers, not singers, not movie stars, not billionaires, were the most famous people in the land. But since the dawn of film and entertainment, music has become increasingly subservient to other media. Music is the background setting to support the film you are watching, or the sexy singer you are watching, or the ambiance for us to eat and socialize. Sitting down for an hour-long symphony concert without any media stimulation would be considered boring by many of my peers. Or worse, it would be perceived to be elitist snobbery, and I think that's kind of fucked up, in my humble opinion. Why is instrumental music important? This is a really tough question for me to put into words. I've committed my life to playing an instrument. It's the most important thing in the world to me. In the moments of my life that have been most challenging, I've been able to keep myself afloat by putting my struggles into the instrument. And music has rewarded that effort with some truly beautiful experiences. But why should someone else care that playing jazz is super meaningful to me if they find it boring? It's not an easy thing to convince someone not to be bored by something. But I think my argument comes down to this. We should all seek to find inspiration and motivation from greatness. Jazz is the Olympics of what is physically and mentally possible in music that's spontaneously created. We don't all look like supermodels or even have basic charisma in some cases, but John Coltrane, for example, would practice 9 hours a day to achieve impossible things every time he was on the bandstand. When artists invest themselves that deeply into music, they are carrying on the tradition of their ancestors and bringing more of the magic of music back into this world. They are not simply making Coca-Cola to sell, they are telling us that anything is possible. I could go on, but now let's hear what Diana has to say.
Okay. Well, I had started writing this after our last discussion.
Oh, good.
And it seems like you've tempered.
I have.
You've tempered your argument.
I've created
down.
defenses for myself.
Yes, you have.
Argument.
So my opener here is more a response to a argument that's often repeated and isn't just yours.
Mm-hmm.
Is something that I see all the time. That classical music in particular, but instrumental music on the whole, is overall better, more important, more complicated, and more significant to our culture than pop music. But I found that it's most often repeated, in particular by people who don't consume pop music in any real capacity, and as such have a wide area of misunderstanding about the entire concept. Pop music is not a genre. Pop music is simply what is the most culturally significant music to us in this current time. So when you look at the Billboard charts, anything in the top 200 for any genre whatsoever, the top 200 of all the albums sold this year, that is the music that is considered what is culturally significant enough to be deemed important music. And on there, you'll find, right as of today, you'll find artists across genres and varying degrees of overall popularity. You'll have people who pop in and out and people who stay and have lasting impressions. The Beatles have been on there and have never left. As well as Michael Jackson is usually somewhere on there. And then you have artists that come for a short time and go away and things like that. Overall, though, there is a misunderstanding of how that that top 200 works. When you don't consume pop music, you are only being exposed to what is the top 20. And when you get into the top 20, that's the things you're going to hear when you walk into a store and it's on the loudspeaker, or the 20 seconds that you are exposed to a radio station, you'll hear the same sounds over and over again. You're not actually being exposed to the whole scheme of pop music that's in the top 200. You're being exposed to the very, very skimmed top 20. And that creates a little bit of a misunderstanding. Overall, I think the argument shouldn't exist at all, being that arguing the superiority of two types of art feels to me like we've missed the bus on what art is supposed to be. But I'm taking a defensive position for the most part that pop music is no less complicated, no less important, and definitely no less culturally significant than classical or instrumental music. The one part I will say on the offensive is that art, which includes music, is meant to speak to us. When people consume some kind of art, they expect to recognize it in some way, or they expect it to recognize some part of them. As just a natural progression, classical art forms as a whole society has decided aren't speaking to them. And somewhat, as you said, it's speaking still really to a smaller group now, and that's academics, which leaves a lot of people out. That doesn't mean that its value is erased or that it doesn't have purpose in the world, but that the average person is not using it to feel comfort or feeling understood by listening to it. And that's where it's kind of lost its meaning.
Damn, that was a good rebuttal. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Cool. I think that you have a valid point about what we're talking about when we talk about pop music, and that is, it is not a genre. It is literally what is popular.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right that, like, maybe other people that have decided not to, that aren't into it, don't listen to it as much. So we don't have as deep of a knowledge of, what turns people on about a particular song or whatever. Although whenever I hear music, or when many musicians hear music, like, we just go into it. Like, I can't, if music is on, it's never background for me. I always listen to it. I always find myself immersed in the different components of it and listening to the different layers of it and stuff.
I too become very distracted if music is on in the background. I can't really focus on another thing.
Yeah.
There are some people that can have like music on and like read a book.
Yeah.
And that's insane to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that I don't want to make my argument that pop music has no artistic value or is not without merit. I'm not trying to destroy pop music and replace it with classical music or jazz music. But I do beg the question. It's like, the thing you said was that society has moved away from these things as a source for entertainment or connecting to it, and that's just okay that happened. Like, that is something I have issues with, because
I know, I can see that.
This music is a tradition that has lasted hundreds of years and been built upon every century, developed. And, you're right that it does continue to exist, but it's a problem to me that it's not as important to the culture at large, because it's our history, and we're in a moment where our society has become very consumerist and very, obsessed with Like I think there's a little bit of a pernicious quality to entertainment that when you think about marketing, like how we're sold things, like the way that companies sell things to us is by telling us that we're broken unless and we need this product. Like there was a big like one of the lawsuits against the gun lobby was an advertisement and for a gun company did in which they said get your man card back. Get a gun if you get your gun you'll get a man card back, meaning that because you're not into guns, you're a weak man and you need this thing.
Sure.
And you get that in other forms of advertising as well. Clothing, like if you don't wear the right clothes, if you don't have the right this or that, and there's
Yeah,
this
I was a
perception.
teenage girl.
Right.
I know.
Yeah.
I know what advertising does to people. And I get that. I just think that we're taking yes, of course, there are pop artists and actors and actresses and models and people who are famous for one medium being used for another. That's something that's been happening for a very long time and is not new in this country.
Mhm.
Um,
It's not new, but it seems amplified at this moment.
it's just easier because of the consumability of social media.
Yeah.
You don't even need to be that popular to be influential.
Yeah.
You could be, of course, on, Rihanna's level and be, you know, have influence beyond anything I could imagine. But you could also have, 100,000 people who think you're neat and you're influential enough to make some money doing,
Yeah.
some advertising on the side. And I think that it's a problem in that some people are willing to abandon, any sort of morality in order to get to
Level of fame.
a minuscule level of notoriety in order to make a couple bucks. And, it's not that I necessarily even blame them because it's hard to make money doing anything now at all.
Hmm.
So if you found something, whatever. But I know that sacrificing your morality to make some money is also not a new concept at all. It's
Right.
just something that some people have always been okay with and some people won't be okay with.
Hmm.
Um, and then when you look at the popular, artists right now, you see a good mix, and it is actually like a reflection of us because it is art. Whether or not it's bad art or good art is up to your personal interpretation. But when you look even, like I mentioned before about the top 200 versus the top 20, when you scale down from the top 200 to the top 20, the ratio between what I think is the more generic, more less innovative and more easily digestible and sometimes even more problematic creators gets a little bit higher, but it doesn't completely eclipse it either. In the top 20, you still have a ratio of what I would call bad artists and good artists.
Mhm.
You still have Chris Brown up there and you
Mhm.
still have Drake up there. Um, but that's a reflection of the problems in our society. We
Yeah.
still glorify, predators and abusive men, and so they're going to be reflected in that.
Hmm.
But at the same time, we also then have, um, Lizzo and Lil Nas X up there as well,
Mhm.
and you have these creators that I think get into this level of popularity, and it's a reflection of what we as a cultural collective want to see. And I think it boils down to there are three things that I think get a person that level of notoriety, and it's that they either get fame for what they're saying,
Mhm.
what their music is conveying, who they are, and why that feels important to us,
Mm-hmm.
or how they're doing it. And then I think that the
Could you
ones
describe what you mean by how they're doing it?
sure. So for the what they're saying, you have people like Travis Scott, and you have Tyler the Creator, Lana Del Rey, Cardi B, and it's literally what they're saying that is speaking to people and making them want to tune in and listen to them.
Mm-hmm.
With who they are, it's Lil Nas X and Lizzo. It's you have a woman who doesn't fit what societal norms would tell us should be famous or beautiful, and she's up there doing it. You have Lil Nas X, an openly gay black teenager who's, maybe his music is not something too entirely new or groundbreaking, but the groundbreaking fact is that he's the one doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And that speaks to us, and that is what makes it art.
Hmm.
With the how they're doing it, and this is where you see a lot more of this in the top 200. When you get into the real meat past the top 20, you see people who like the Algiers, who are like inventing new genres by pulling from older genres like gospel and jazz and updating it.
Mm-hmm.
You have Leah Bertucci, who uses technology to make music.
So the
Essentially,
how is essentially the craft,
the
how they
craft
craft
of
their
doing
music.
it, which
Yeah.
is, I think, something that when you discount all of pop music and don't really spend any time paying attention to it, you might be missing the parts that you actually would like as somebody who
Sure.
appreciates the crafting of music. So, and then Ian Chang, who you might know, but he's
The drummer?
yeah,
I went to school with him.
Do you really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, he's using artificial intelligence to make music.
Right. Yeah.
So,
yeah,
like,
that's
I
cool.
mean, it's, and these artists are all creating enough of a fan base for themselves that they have earned themselves a cultural significance, because they're making something that people want to consume and that people recognize and feel inspired by or seen by or changed by.
Right.
And so I think that those three factors are what actually go into making like some of these more influential pop artists.
Right. Well, a couple things. I would, for myself, like to make a distinction between let's say the top 20, the stuff we hear all the time, and the greater genre or the greater world of popular music. Because I agree on all levels and all genres there are stuff that's breaking through by interesting people. I don't think anyone is of the thinking that if it's popular that means it can't be good. I mean, certainly there are people who feel more strongly one way or the other about how pure they feel about their one thing. But like Ian Chang went to jazz school. I mean, he's clearly a trained musician. I'd consider like closer pure ship to him for like jazzers than maybe like the other pop artists that he is in this genre with. And the other thing that I just think is worth just something that I think about. I don't. It's another tough line of where that is, but what we do in music is essentially manipulate emotion, right? I mean, that's the job of a good storyteller,
Sure.
to manipulate one's emotion. And that's the area where I feel most concerned about it sort of lining up with the sort of data mining and like popular culture thing that's happening, because I feel like these people on the top, these producers or whoever, like sort of like they've know what we want and they give it to us, and that feedback loop isn't it's not reflective of like this is what the culture wants. It's reflective of like this is how you maintain control of, like. And I know that it's a little conspiracy theory sounding, and like,
it's not that you're wrong. Those companies are trying to do that,
yeah,
but they like every other conglomerate in media right now. You see it with analog television and these companies that won't let go and update to what we've decided we like now.
Yeah.
They're all gonna either adapt or die.
Right.
And that the music industry is no different
Right.
from that.
Have you heard this a quote from the president of Disney? I forget what his last name is, but it's something to the effect of like, it's not our responsibility to make art. It's not our responsibility to make history. It's our responsibility to make money. And in the course of doing that, we may make art, we may make history, but that's not our primary objective.
Yeah, but the entire world is looking at them and thinks they're the worst. Like we've kind of culturally decided that, well, one, screw you.
Right, that's true.
Two, they're not even, Disney isn't even the best creator in their own genre anymore. They're not the best at what they do anymore. And they're having a hard time letting go of that, which is why they won't adapt. And
I mean, you're not wrong in your argument that like when we there is a sort of power of the people thing. When we hear these comments like that is not the value of Americans. We as individuals do not say if it needs, it makes money, that's what we want. That we say we want to hear stories that move us, and we want to hear art and make history and things like that. But I would argue that Disney's not on the decline. Disney's on the rise. They're making more money than ever before. And people are not boycotting Disney because this guy said that thing.
No.
This is just one conversation that would be normally heard behind closed doors that we happen to hear,
Right. Nobody's boycotting Disney over that, but nobody boycotted Disney over their anti-Semitism either.
True, fair.
Nobody cares enough to boycott on a large enough scale. But the thing is, you can't boycott these companies that are too big to fail on a large enough scale. You can't boycott Amazon out of business. You can't boycott Disney out of business. What will happen, though, is that people are going to care less and less. And ultimately, the mediums through which we consume things are going to continue to change. It's going to be hard for Disney to keep up in an environment where everybody is used to having one, maybe two places where they watch all of their content on a streaming service that they have to pay for once a month. To pay for another one just to get only one company's content is something that people are less and less okay with doing.
Mm-hmm.
They've got a couple more years out of the boomers. But they're going to have a hard time getting newer and newer generations to keep one-upping on this thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they're going to have to adapt, or they're going to slowly start to burn out. And with pop music as well, right now on the top 20, which you said you want to restrict the conversation to that, like that really
that's right.
hyper, the most popular,
the biggest
among
hits.
Them. Two of those artists that are on the top 20 right now may not be from musical genres that you like personally, but are from two people who forced their way in without the help of big time producers. So
I want to talk more about that. Go ahead.
So they can set up these walls, and they can have that, and they can force Chris Brown down all our throats collectively and metaphorically, and sometimes, unfortunately, literally. But they can't lock the door, and because now we have access to music anywhere, and we can forcefully make people popular by what we actually want to hear.
Right.
And that's continuously being done. It's harder, for sure, to break past the walls that those, artificially popular companies have put up, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. I have some thoughts. I don't know exactly where I'm a little afraid where this might lead, but I'm gonna say it anyway. So like you had the example of Lil Nas, and I think that it's a very moving story of a young gay black teen writing songs and like getting acclaim. Um, but and I think that's an interesting social phenomenon. But like as a musical phenomenon, like is it earned? I guess is my question. Like like I grew up with like a young musical virtuoso, um, like in New Haven. His name's Christian Sands, and he's doing well. I mean, he's in Christian McBride's band. I mean, he's a jazz musician.
Sure.
But like the level of talent, is otherworldly. Like he could not only could he play anything, like if he heard something, if he heard a soloist play an idea, like he could play it back exactly, like perfect note for note. He had that kind of perfection of pitch and of like photographic memory to just like, and that's kind of freedom in music, to be able to do anything at any second. That's otherworldly. Now, he'll never have the same cultural impact that Lil Nas has. And Lil Nas, does he have
What percentage of his album have you listened to?
only that one song?
Yeah. Okay. So I think that's where you need to stop and take a step back because
I suppose.
I get it. When it's a genre of music you don't like, it's very hard for
It's
me.
not that I don't like. Okay, go ahead. Finish that.
It's very difficult for me, for instance. There are country artists that I do appreciate. And I know that there's a big cultural significance to country. It's hard for me to make a good critique on it, positively or negatively, because as a genre, I just don't like it. It's very hard for me to make a good faith argument either way about most country music.
Yeah.
It is difficult when you don't consume a lot of it, to make a analysis of it. You can have an opinion on it, but making an analysis of it is difficult if you don't know the source material.
But can I ask? I mean, it's a fair criticism. Like I'm kind of talking out of my ass on a lot of these people. But tell me, like Lil Nas, like what makes him talented other than like and this is also controversial, but other than his like lyrics, I'm talking like from a musical perspective. Can he sing? Can he play an instrument? Like those are the things that I care about.
Right. Those are the
and that's
things
not
that
for
you
everybody.
care about.
Fine, but I think that it needs to be.
Those aren't the ending definitions of music. If you are really erasing lyricism,
Well,
I
just want to put that in another box for a second.
Okay. If we're erasing lyricism, then you have to take Lil Nas X, who, as a teenager, took like a couple of sounds and turned them into a song.
Did he write the sounds that we're talking about? What are we talking about? Like his background music?
Like it was the first song was like a, Mod Podge of sounds and clips and things like that were turned into like the catchiest song that's been dropped in a year.
By him?
By him.
So he took source material from other songs and mixed them together?
So you can find a lot of like scrap beats around that people, that are just, they're empty shells of things. And then, but if you decided right now to take, a day or 2 days to clobber around on the internet and try to piece together a song from things that are available freely on the internet. If you came up with something as good as what Lil Nas X did, I would be extremely proud of you and extremely floored.
Yeah.
Because that in itself is a musical skill. It involves having a tonal ear. It involves having a knowledge of what people like and what they think is good. And it has a skill in which you can, craft a beginning, middle, and an end out of something that has none of those things.
Yeah. I mean, I do agree it is a talent, and I do acknowledge that it's something that I couldn't do. I couldn't write a hit with instruments to save my life, I'm sure. That's not what my skill set lies. Um, but don't you just think a little bit like there's something a little bit just less earned about like taking something that exists and gluing it to something else that exists, and other than like learning how to make it yourself? Like, I mean, I know that's where we are in society, right? And that's what technology does for us. But the technology of machines that have allowed us to put those two things together has prevented us from learning how to do that.
I don't think that at all. I think that that's exactly what it is we're learning to do. We're just doing it with updated machines. What are you doing when you're crafting a song with an instrument? You're taking the musical theory that's been discovered by somebody else.
Mhm.
You're plastering your own ideas over it, and you're cobbling together
Correct.
the pieces that someone else has discovered are what works
But
to
it-
make a song.
Right. But it's taken me hours and years to know how to do that. I learned how to do that. I sat with my instrument. I learned how to play in tune first. I learned how, that's what I'm talking about. That's the thing that concerns me,
Right. And some people some people have an easier time learning and hearing those things than others. So, like, some people are going to have a knack
Right.
for knowing what goes together, or who have an aptitude for it, where they just can hear a sound and go, that's gonna make sense, and they can just throw it together.
Mm.
I don't have that.
Right.
I would have to work a lot harder, than probably, any average person to try to make sounds that make sense go together out off the top of my head. Other people, it just clicks and makes sense to them. I'm not one of them.
Mm.
And I appreciate when people have that as an ability and when
Sure.
they use it. Do I think that he's the most talented musician in the world? Probably not.
Mm.
I think he's still a teenager.
Sure.
I think that he's probably going to get better and better, but I think he's definitely got some sort of natural ability to have an idea for what's going to sound good and to put it down and make it actually happen.
Yeah.
I think that that's a skill. And I think then obviously his real skill is what we've left out of the conversation, which is his lyrical
Right.
poetry.
And that he deserves credit for sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just like my concern comes over like where we place value, like, and it's a pie chart, really. Like I can acknowledge a certain amount of value in what he does. But society at large places more value on what he does than what I place value in.
Yeah.
And that concerns me. Like and I guess every generation of persons that like doesn't understand the next generation of music. Like, music was better when I was a kid, but I'm not even talking about music when I was a kid. I think that
I know you're talking about a very specific. This is the thing that interests me too.
Yeah.
Is because, and you touched on this a little bit in your opening statement. But when people in general, I mean, with you, I don't know if this is also the case, but when people in general make the argument about musical superiority in classical music, they're talking about a very like specific time period. I feel like of classical music, like I would you put like a timeline on the music, or like
No, not
any
necessarily.
sort of definition to what you think is the?
I think the 1960s was when there was really started to be a slide into corporatization of the music industry, because prior to that, executives were willing to allow artists to sort of take a chance. Like, we don't know what people like. Let's just make this like Frank Zappa. Like, sure, that's weird. Let's do that, And then at a certain point in the late 60s, 70s, executives started saying, we know what people want. People want this, and that's what we're going to give them.
Sure.
And that's the beginning of this period of sort of decline, in my opinion.
I get it. I find it interesting just because we've talked a lot in the past about, these classical instrumentations of music where what was important was the theories they were developing and the types of composition that they were creating and all these milestones that they were making.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that the argument is never that any genres that came before that were like these, that tribal music is inherently better or
No, I love all music. I think that music has a long history, and I don't want to, like, we can never ask a society to go back to something that was before, because that's not how society works. But we can ask them to preserve things from prior societies that we deem important,
Well, sure, and we should do that.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it's still going to speak to the majority of people. It's just not.
Yeah.
So one thing I'd like to ask you
Mm-hmm.
is, what are you keeping up with the musicians who are making the genres that you like that are making it in contemporary times? Like what instrumental musicians are you consuming
tough one.
that are making music right now? Because they're out there and they're doing really cool things.
They are. It's not, and oftentimes I find myself on the opposite side of the argument that I'm making. Like when musicians get together, we vent about like how things
you guys
are.
all get together and just
Well, of course, like
outside,
because we're in the course of our careers, and we all want more success and more recognition, and we see the trends are shifting away from the kinds of music that we create, and we vent about it. And usually, I'm the one that's making the case, well, there's still great music being made, like, and I do feel that way. I'm not saying that there is that all is lost. Society has slid away from great, like it's a pie chart. Like
Right.
there is a percentage of people that care about these things a lot. There's a percentage that care about it a little bit. There's a percentage of people that don't know they care about, but are sort of gettable, and it's not my mission to say pop music sucks and we need to get rid of it. It's my mission to expand that little corner of the world that I live in, and that's what I'm trying to do, and that's why I'm a little hesitant about this conversation. But I think it's been fun,
Yeah.
at least. But all we can do from the from the outside of centers of power is just sort of pontificate about how cultures change and why they change, and what we wish were different, and how we think we can change it to the small degree that we're able to.
Well, I disagree on there. I think that what we can do is we can take an active participation role in our support for the art that we want to see. If we allow these corporations to continue to just funnel things to us.
The thing is, I'm in a very small minority here. I have to convince people who feel the way that you do that the thing I care about is more important than the thing that you care about.
Why do you have to do that?
Because
I think that's important too.
Well, okay, you do.
Yeah, I do think that jazz, that classical is still very important. I just don't think that it, as it has already been created, is speaking to me. I think that there are people out there that are creating it now in ways that do speak to me.
Sure.
But I don't, when I have a bad day, like, I don't feel comforted by Tchaikovsky.
Right.
He doesn't soothe my heart.
Yeah.
So there are things that are, lacking. I still respect what has been done.
Yeah.
And note how influential it has been into where we are now, but it's just not actively doing that.
So how do I change that?
You should be directly supporting the artists that are making music that you want to
As a
hear.
consumer, I should be supporting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very small thing I can do.
It's not that small. Do you know how influential you can directly influence by just loaning your voice of support to a small artist? I think that especially today with social media, um, the amount of influence that each individual has over the direction of things has actually gotten bigger, not
Yeah.
smaller. So somebody tuning in right now who wants to support an instrumentalist band or artist and doesn't know where to find that stuff because it's maybe not as accessible, just give them one name, one person that they should
Check out.
go and look up and
Okay.
and consume the art of.
Well, I think I'm trying to go as current as possible, but I'm gonna. Robert Glasper is an incredible pianist who bridges the gap between playing sort of R&B in an instrumental fashion and taking it to really complex and beautiful places. Thundercat, Kamasi Washington, Tyshawn Sorey. He's a little bit more out there, but an incredibly talented and interesting character. Knee Body, really fun band. Yeah.
Cool. And I'll throw out that you should be listening to and supporting Black Violin, which are maybe the coolest group of dudes I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
Classically trained violinists who, I don't know, rock harder than most people on the top 200 right now. So
Yeah.
that's who I would
Cool.
stand for.
All right. This seems like a satisfying place to call it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we've done it. Go online and vote for who won somewhere. Find a place. I don't know. All right. Thank you for listening. We will be back soon, and have yourselves a lovely day.
Bye.